It's not recording, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is? I wonder if that microphone's pretty good. It probably picked that up. Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of Telling Stories. Today, we're in the Upside Down. We're taking a deeper look at one of the most binge-watched shows on all of Netflix. Today, we're taking a look at one of the most binge-watched shows on all of Netflix. That shouldn't be hard to say. Today, we're headed to the Upside Down to take a look at one of the most binge-watched shows on all of Netflix, Season 1 of Stranger Things. So buckle up and hang on tight. I'm Andrew Crabtree, and this is Telling Stories. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Telling Stories. Today, we're going to my favorite fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. I actually did look it up, and yes, Hawkins is fictional. Don't take a road trip, you won't find it. This is a series that me and the critics actually agree on, as it received 18 nominations at the 69th Annual Emmy Awards. It also won the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by an Ensemble in a Drama Series for 2016. So enough of that, let's get into the review, starting with characters. I thought that this show had outstanding characters, and it was really interesting how they're broken down. I'm not even going to do this review like I normally would with primary, secondary, and antagonist. I think that this story actually breaks down into three character groups. This story breaks down into the kids, the teens, and the adults. In true 80s fashion, Stranger Things is a coming of... In true 80s fashion, Stranger Things is a coming-of-age tale as much as it is anything, where you have your kids, which are Mike, Lucas, Will, and everybody's favorite, Dustin. And you're able to compare these kids to the teens, which would be Nancy, Jonathan, and you know, everybody's surprising favorite, Steve Harrington. And it's cool because you can kind of look at where the kids are and where they're going and what life in a small town looks like as you grow from, you know, bicycle riding, Dungeons and Dragons playing, you know, through to like the complexity of Hopper's character or Joyce's character and all the baggage that they deal with in their lives. Obviously, the antagonist in this show is a lot more complex than the average. You know, there's the idea of the Upside Down as a place and the Demogorgon and whatever else might be in the Upside Down past the Demogorgon. But regardless of how complex it is, you do feel the evil that our kind of cast of characters is up against. So characters, I'm going to give a outstanding 10 out of 10. Moving on to our second element of plot, I thought that the plot was really good and it's really deep and you kind of really get immersed in it. But I almost did think that it was a little too complicated and it gets to be intricate and a little hard to follow, especially as we start to try to understand the connection between the Upside Down and our world and how that gate gets opened. And complexity is good and it's really interesting, but in terms of being the watchability factor of a show, it can get a little muddy. So I thought it was good, and I really did see all of the characters interacting with the plot, but I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. Looking at our third element of a good story, we're going to look at cultural relevancy, which is really interesting with this story being set in the 1980s. So typically, when I look at cultural relevancy, we're looking at how a story makes us view our own culture or makes us want to see change in our own culture. But being set in a unique settings in Hawkins, Indiana in the 1980s, Stranger Things actually has had a different effect. Rather than us seeing something in our culture we want to change, it's actually brought this wave of 80s nostalgia that's kind of swept through modern culture. It's really interesting to me how one show can have this effect where you're having kids that didn't grow up in the 80s going back and watching E.T. and Close Encounters and all these 80s classics that have kind of served as fuel for Stranger Things and kind of brought that 80s culture back to the forefront and this idea of nostalgia into modern society. So with that, because we're not actually looking at something we want to change in our culture, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. But before we move on to our fourth criteria of entertainment value, I'm actually going to break up the action here with a little bonus round. Now, when the Duffer Brothers were actually pitching Stranger Things to networks, it was pitched as Montauk, not Stranger Things. The show's title was actually changed after it had been picked up by Netflix. It was originally called Montauk as a nod to an actual lab in Montauk, New York, that people kind of have these same urban legends, and there's all kinds of legends of telekinesis and just kind of eerie, mysterious stuff that happens is kind of the motivation, from what I understand, for Hawkins' lab. But the setting was actually changed from New York to a small town in Indiana because the brothers thought that that setting would be a little more controllable than something that was so close to a major urban area in New York. So, a little random trivia for you, and now we're moving on to our fourth criteria, entertainment value. This is the segment that I think Stranger Things does better than anything else in this amazing storyline and this amazing world that they've built. As I was writing my notes for my scores here, I wrote, I'd give it a 12 if I could, but I can. It's my show, so I am going to give it a 12 out of 10. Entertainment value, binge watched this whole thing as fast as I could. So, entertainment value with a score of 12 out of 10. Pushing on to our fifth and last criteria of setting, I think this is another area where this show absolutely crushes it. Anyone that's ever lived in a small town can completely identify with the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. They did such a good job of selling it that I actually looked up if Hawkins was a real place. But I think this story being set in a small town with this mysterious lab, it just creates this amazing effect. So for setting, I'm going to give another 10 out of 10. Alright guys, so now we have each segment score. We can total those up and bring you a total score of 47 out of 50. Very well done show. There's a reason that this show is so critically acclaimed and binge watched and celebrated and everyone loves it. But I think that 47 of 50 reflects it. So there you have it. I was happy to give this show an A grade, and as you can tell, I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm glad that my grade reflects that. I actually have a little 11 and Hopper figurines on my desk here. I'm sure I'll get around to reviewing season 2 of this show very soon, but in the meantime, check back next week where I'm going to actually take a look and list my 3 most underrated TV shows of all time. Just be a fun little segment that I do, so be sure to check back for that. And as always guys, if you liked anything you saw, make sure you hit that like button below, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate every subscriber I get. So let's grow this community. Let's talk about books and movies and TV shows and all of the stories that are relevant in our culture today. Check back next week. It's been So, check back next week. It's been a privilege. I'm Andrew Crabtree, and this has been Telling Stories.